Afternoon, Sarah.
Hello.
Beautiful offices in this Shakespeare Martineau in Stratford-upon-Avon. Beautiful.
And cool.
Cool, yeah. So I've just travelled basically about 50 minutes from Birmingham, and I think we were in the coolest place on the planet with the air conditioning on. So when I left home this morning to come here, it was hot, but the car was beautiful, nice, and And when we stepped out, it reminded me of our touring days, particularly in the Middle East. And when we stepped out, the heat was just
really hits you.
So I think somebody said the 70s was the closest we got to this, but this is beautiful and nice and cool.
Yeah, it's very good in here. I'm surprised we haven't got more people in today to escape the heat, actually. I think people are missing a trick. Get into an office or a shop with the aircon on.
Well, I heard, and we'll get into the beef of this conversation today, I heard, so we're sitting in now July 2022. Mm-hmm. Hybrid will come to in a second, talking about hybrid. And they said one of the reasons more people might come to work is because of the aircon. Because obviously very few people have got air conditioning at home. But anyway, well, listen, Sarah, before we jump into the conversation, for those who don't know, you are the CEO of Shakespeare Martineau. You're the first female and interesting non-lawyer who's in charge of a firm in the top legal 50. Now, I didn't know this, but you're a trained accountant.
I am.
PwC and Deloitte's. You've also got, interestingly, for an accountant, branding experience at Boots, which is really interesting. You're a governor like me at a university. You're at Nottingham Trent University. You're a member of the Society of Leadership, fellows at St George's House. And of course, we know each other because we both sit on the board of the West Midlands CBI Council.
True.
I also didn't know that you enjoy theatre and music.
Absolutely. It's what got me through the pandemic, actually. But I've been doing it my whole life, since I was a teenager. But yes, it balances out all of that heavy business stuff with singing and writing and performing and acting. So,
Wow. Extraordinary. Well, I think what struck me, which is what's brought me in front of you here, is I didn't know half of this stuff, so we'll bring that out anyway. But what struck me was your use of social media as a leader in telling the world what you think. So that's one of the key issues I'm going to pick out with you. But just a quick conversation, if we can, about what brought you here. And so I'm just curious, what brought you to a law firm, having had branding experience and an accountant's experience?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm a bit of a self-professed disruptor, and I like to be in areas or sectors where there's a job to be done in terms of transformation or creating a more level playing field, or just showing that there's a different way of making business commercially successful and purposeful and good at the same time. And there was the opportunity in this particular role that I got headhunted for about 3 years ago, and I asked myself, where can I make the biggest difference? Where I was at the time, which was a firm that I loved, or this. And there was an element of what we do in Shakespeare Martineau that is brave, and so I was attracted to being in a brave firm in a traditional sector because it suits my skill set, but also what I'm good at, which was taking people through a journey, I suppose.
And I'll tell you why I asked that question in a second, but how did you find coming into what is traditionally seen as a pretty closed profession, normally doesn't innovate much, sticks to what it knows best? Branding, I don't think they've ever taken it seriously, solicitors and marketing. So it was just interesting. How did you find, although you did work for accountants, how did you find you were able to disrupt the thinking?
So first of all, there's genuinely no comparison between accountants and law firms. And so I worked for another law firm before I came to this one. So I've actually now been in the sector about 18, 19 years. And when I first came into the sector, I thought I was going to another professional services business, knowing accountancy firms, and the culture shock of a law firm versus an accountancy firm, very, very different. I won't go into all the nitty-gritty of that, but of course that just appealed to me even more because you can make an even bigger change. So the further behind something is, or the further entrenched something is, the bigger the challenge. And so I loved that, and I've always had the benefit of being respected enough that people have listened to me and been able to affect and drive quite a lot of change. But ultimately, the reason I've ended up in this particular law firm, which is now a group called AMPA, is exactly that. We're willing to take it to another level. So I was able to bring a lot of that commercial marketing, branding, PLC experience from Boots and my accountancy background into my first law firm, but then it kind of hit a point where it got hard to take it to that next level. Shakespeare Martineau's always been a bit brave, and so I've been able to push that further, but not just for the sake of it, because I truly believe there's a better way, and a better way that will create a more inclusive business forum, that will use talent, that will actually be a more commercially successful business. And I think given the volatility in the world at the moment and everything else going on in our markets, let alone the legacy of the pandemic, we're crying out for doing things differently. But I'm very lucky that I work with a bunch of people who agree with me. So
let's look at leadership in itself.
Yeah.
We just said you're a member of the Society of Leadership. So let's start from you as a leader at the top, and then we'll delve with a few subjects. Now, 20 years ago, we didn't have something called social media.
No.
So all the stakeholders, whether they're employees or external clients or the local stakeholder base, would only hear from a leader probably through the press, because I don't think we had YouTube channels or anything.
Yeah.
But you've taken a stance of being really on the front foot when it comes to making your views known, particularly through social media. So there's a school of thought which says that anything and everybody does in a firm or a business needs to be checked by internal comms before it goes out. Most people are advised not to say anything controversial, and we're talking about politics, either local or national or international. And some have even advised not to go on social media at all.
Yeah.
So if we take, and I think it's probably the right reason, if we take the Bank of England, the governor will rarely say anything on Twitter, because obviously what he says will move markets. So what stance did you take when the social media platforms came? What did you think as a leader? Do I keep my mouth shut? Which you don't. And if you don't, why did you, and what do you think is the right way to act on social media in terms of general communications?
Yeah, so this is a huge subject. I think it's time for change. I think there is a gap in how we move social, economic and other political change forward for the greater good. I mean, given the challenges that we face in society, in the world, in the economy, all the rest of it, I think we have to drive change. And I think if you look at recent stats, but they've been consistent now for a couple of years, things like the Edelman Trust Barometer, that gap is being expected to be filled by business leaders. You know, business leaders are now more trusted than politicians, media, social, local government, other opinion formers. And I think it's part of the job. So I remember somebody said to me, what are you doing on social media? Who's doing the day job? And I said, this is the day job. And I believe that very, very strongly. So there are several things come together. First of all, there's a gap there that I think as business leaders we have some responsibility to partially fill. And I don't just mean to make comments about politics. What I mean is to drive positive transformation and to drive change and economic recovery, social mobility, whatever it may be. So that's the first thing. I think our people expect us to do it, particularly the newer, younger demographics coming through. Many polls of millennials, but particularly Gen Z and now into Gen Alpha, expect their business leaders and their business to have a stance and to have a purpose. And it's a key selection criteria as to why people are coming through. So the next thing is the pandemic really showed me that we can blur the boundaries. And I was one of those people who didn't use social media professionally. I used it personally, actually, but I kept the two things very separate. I think the pandemic blurred those boundaries between the personal and the professional. And I brought three elements of me together. My very strong views about whether it's politics, business, etc., my professional expertise and my job, and also my hobby, which is singing and music, as you said earlier. And in the midst of that pandemic, I just felt this very strong need to communicate with people. And it was a really easy way of communicating with all of my people and the people that I know externally was to use things like LinkedIn and Twitter more. So I just blurred those boundaries and I just brought the whole of me into that. And what I realised was the amount of engagement I was getting as a result of that, the amount of followers, all the rest rest of it. But it wasn't followers for followers' sake. It was connecting with like-minded people. So go back to that role as a leader to drive positive transformation for the business sector, but more broadly. And it just struck me there was a wide open space there to walk into that was now a fundamental part of leadership. So it's also very agile. You can get the message across very quickly, and you can really get out there what you stand for. And I think that's needed.
And did you find anybody alienated by your views? Did you have people say, saying this is not what you should be doing? You should not be propagating your personal views.
I've not had the personal. There was an element of people, understandably, not working out why I was doing it myself, because there's a key thing here. To be authentic, you have to do it yourself. You can't hire somebody to run your social media for you. And I think your point earlier that many leaders would go out there in the press, they probably read a press release that somebody else wrote, but it wasn't their voice.
No.
And I felt very strongly that to create and to have a voice, and you need to know why. You can't just do it for the sake of it. There has to be a why in all of this. And that why needs to be connected to your personal purpose, but your business purpose as well. So once you've got that and then you understand it, it has to be you, it has to be authentic. So at first people were questioning why I was doing it.
Yep.
But once they got past that, so far, I really haven't had a lot of people negatively saying to me, why have you got an opinion? Why are you making political statements? Well, it's quite the opposite, actually. I get an enormous amount of feedback saying, thank goodness somebody needs to speak out. Now, you need to do it respectfully. And, people will know, some people have seen it. I did a series of parodies about the Prime Minister in December last year, after he mentioned, I'd been to the CBI conference, and it was not the professional standard that I expected to see from the Prime Minister when he started going off about Peppa Pig World. Yeah. So I happened to have a £1 Peppa Pig advent calendar, and every day I'd been criticising him quite a lot, and I thought, do you know what, I need to put my money where my mouth is and ask myself what I've learnt about leadership. So every day during December I opened my Peppa Pig and I made a little video about leadership insights. Now, of course, I was being sarcastic to a certain extent about the Prime Minister and calling him out to say that I didn't believe his standards of leadership were where they ought to be, but I wasn't doing it in a way that was extremely rude or extremely personal. I was almost reversing it and trying to set out what leadership should be. So I think you've got to find the right way of doing it, and you'll get back what you put out. If you do it really disrespectfully and really aggressively, that's what you'll get back. If you do it with humour, personality and authenticity, my experience so far is that people respond really well to it.
And did people say to you, ask you, it's not your role to comment on how the Prime Minister's doing, your role is to run the business? Did anybody say that and say, look,
not really,
your remit,
but that's possibly because of the way I was doing it, was to very much say, okay, exactly what you've just said, that's his job, and I can't know what it feels like to stand in his shoes, but if I now reflect that mirror back at myself in my leadership role, what have I learned from watching him that's making me a better leader? So I kind of positioned it like that. But for me, everything has got to be connected back to that why. So I'm quite clear, if I think about our business vision and our business purpose, what I'm doing on social media is aligned with that. If I was doing something that wasn't aligned with that, I think that might be quite tricky. So I remember I got this question. I did a keynote speech at a lawyer conference recently, and there were people who said, this is a daft accolade, but I'm the number one law firm social media leader in the country.
Nice.
So I've got more impressions and followers and engagement than any other law firm leader, even though some of those law firms are 20, 30 times the size of our law firm. And so somebody said, well, we wouldn't let our people do that. And I said, you don't trust them then? And they said, oh no, it's our clients. Again, this is a misnomer. As long as you're respectful, clients will understand and respect that we don't all have the same opinion and we don't all share the same politics. And it's not always about politics, it's about how we'd fix problems in the economy or diversity or whatever else it is. But they, most in people, and let's treat them like adults, are happy to have a respectful debate and share difference of opinion. And that difference of opinion makes us a better society, makes us a better business, and it's important that we share that. So I think the vast majority of clients wouldn't mind somebody speaking out if they didn't necessarily agree with them, as long as it was done in the right way. And that's certainly my experience that I'm getting from our clients as well.
So 2 observations. One is you're less risk averse and prepared to take a risk, because it is a risk. Some people see that as a risk. Doing things outside the norm.
Yes.
So that's the first thing. So so it sounds quite entrepreneurial. You took a risk and said, let's just see how it goes. So I suppose my second question is, having now done it, and having now been recognised, because people do recognise who you are because of your disruptive sort of approach towards social media. Do you think, and are there exceptions where they shouldn't, do you think most leaders should get on the front foot and have it as part of their job description, is that they communicate with the world on a regular basis like you do? I know somebody said when you're doing the job, but you actually think it's part of the job.
Yeah. Now, you said something earlier which is really relevant, and we need to be careful with it. If the governor of the Bank of England speaks out, or the chair of a listed PLC, it can affect market prices.
Mr. Tesla does it all the time.
Yeah. So precisely. So there is a certain level of responsibility. I'm not at those dizzy heights. So I do accept that for some leaders, there are other very valid reasons why they can't do some of it. I think that's not necessarily true in all cases. But if you strip that aside, I think it comes back to times have changed and relevance now to all of our stakeholders. Like I say, I've got as many people who work with me in our business. We've got about 1,300 people and counting at the moment. As many of them watch me and listen to me and engage with me on external social media as they do internal social media. The boundaries are blurred.
Yeah.
And the generations coming through do not make those distinctions at all. So if you want to be relevant as a leader and talk to all of your people, but all of your wider stakeholders, and it goes much, much broader, then why not, really? Genuinely, what have you got to lose? And what I would say to people is start small, work out your message, and if it needs to be a safe message till you build confidence with it, then absolutely do that. And you'll be amazed it's not going to be as bad as you think. What I would say, though, is, I've been on holiday recently and I've come back to see an absolute barrage of abuse about the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeve. I was quite shocked, actually. It was a video that she put out. I didn't particularly like the video, but the barrage of abuse on Twitter was totally different to what I think you would get on LinkedIn, putting something like that out. Yeah. So if you're really apprehensive about it, stay on the more professional social platforms and just start small, start safe, and see what happens.
So a couple of things. Did you say 1,100 staff?
1,300.
1,300. Well, I've got something interesting. So I've bumped into some of these staff at various places. And what became clear is, it's quite astonishing, actually, they knew you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because it's social media, it almost felt that they had an open door with you, and it didn't seem to me that they thought you were aloof. So I think one of the things that has cut across to me, because I said, Miss Sarah, is that what you've done, I think, through social media and giving your views, is you've humanised the organisation, and people, it doesn't matter where they are, feel they seem to know you, as opposed to perhaps getting a communication through a newsletter or something. But I think they understand through your social media where you stand, what you stand for, and how they can approach you. And you've just said yourself, they can reach you through these channels. And listen, I wasn't in corporate world too long, but I do know the ones when I worked, this is going back a few decades. Traditionally, they were up at the top floor.
Yeah.
Traditionally, the door was shut.
Yeah.
Traditionally, in front of them was a gatekeeper who you would have to go to say, can we? And it seems a totally different world where it's much more transparent and open. That's why I was really keen to understand your rationale for being really that open to the world.
So being really honest with you, which is something I'm incredibly honest, and I find, again, you will really struggle by being honest. It's hard sometimes to be truly honest about lots of different things, especially with a difficult message, but if you are really honest, it tends to work. But what I found, the pandemic was the turning point here. So I'd been in this job about 12 months when the first lockdown hit. And we had 10 offices at that point and about 800 people. So that's how much it's changed in 2 years, just over 2 years in that amount of time. And I was finding it really hard to be visible to everybody. So I'd be going around visiting all the different offices, but you don't have time to constantly be visible. When the pandemic hit, I famously turned the garden shed, which was filled with my kids' old toys, into a home office, and then it kind of grew from there and it became a whole thing. And what I found, it was just a really natural instinct, was I was scared, all of our people were scared, we were completely and utterly in it together, and my natural instinct was to just start talking to them, because I just felt very strongly that there was a as much as I could give reassurance, and I couldn't really, but I could share, I could empathise, and I could be really honest about what I was feeling and the things we were thinking about as a business and some of the big difficult decisions we might have to take. I wanted to bring people on the journey with us. So I started making little videos from my shed to the firm, as well as the external stuff. And I was just chatting away about everything because I was isolating. For the first 6 months, I didn't see anybody else. So I was talking to them about the rhubarb. I sang on my own from Les Mis to them. I cringe now when I think about this. But it was just what came naturally, was to try and engage with people and make them feel part of something. And the feedback I started getting was, oh, now we see you. And I suddenly realised that this old-fashioned way of running around all the offices trying to be visible to people, there was no way I could ever win that game. But suddenly, by using different media in different ways at different times, the engagement and the visibility went through the roof. So I've kept it. So a lot of those things that we did in those early days, I still do. Not quite as frequently now, because we're not in the middle of a crisis. And we've got a nice, healthy balance now of me being out and about. But if I want to get to a big audience, we do it all online. We have online conferences. I still make videos at least once a month. And for our membership, we call our partners members, we do that every 2 weeks. I make videos for them, and we've just carried on. So it shows you, doesn't it, that after something so awful, there are silver linings you can find. But I don't think I would have got to that without the pandemic. So it changed the path.
So if you're open about your views and you communicate through these new social media channels, how do you ensure that your staff do the same?
So they won't all, because it's not right for them. So the first thing is we have to treat people as individuals, and we need to treat them as adults. So for people who aren't good at it or don't feel comfortable with it, I would say that's fine. You do what your bag is. You do what you're good at. So we talk a lot about playing to strengths. But for those who want to do it, we don't have rules. We basically say, behave like an adult, be respectful. We trust you. Do what's right. And quite frankly, if you can't trust the people you've hired to say the right thing on social media, then something's gone wrong, really. I mean, if you have to give them a rule book and tell them what they can and can't say, it's a parent-child relationship. We want an adult-to-adult relationship in our business. We want to treat people as adults and trust them. And yes, of course, we provide bits of guidance and training, and for those who want it, not for everybody. And I can honestly say, so far, I'm touching wood or recycled something, because we're sitting on all sorts of recycled things here. But I can honestly say, so far, I haven't had a single example of anybody doing something that I haven't looked at and thought, or that I have looked at and thought, I haven't seen that. And some of our people are very, very political. Some of them are very humorous. Some of them stick to more business content. But it's all about being yourself. Yeah. And I mean, that's the key to this. You can't tell somebody how to be themselves. You need to liberate them to be themselves.
So looking at metrics, as somebody said earlier, why you're not doing your day job. Yeah. When you adopted this open way of communication, which I think is fantastic, by the way.
Thanks, Ninder.
What did the KPIs tell you? And I'll give you just some sort of example. Has culture changed? Have you managed to retain clients? Have you got more new clients? I know you've gone up by 500 people during pandemic. Yeah. So it appears that this open style of management seems to be hitting all your KPIs. Yeah. Is that right? So
we measure things on a balanced scorecard.
Yep.
And so we look at client stats, we look at financial stats, people stats and process stats. Now, some of the growth that we talked about there is from our M&A strategy that we may or may not get to, and our House of Brands strategy that we talk about. But in terms of the key stats that I think shifted, we had, if I'm really honest with you, some quite dreadful stats around things like Glassdoor, which is an external TripAdvisor for employers, basically. Our internal engagement surveys, we weren't doing many of them, but they weren't brilliant. And this is about the time I arrived. And we were scoring really badly on. There's a thing called Roll on Friday in the legal press. I think we were second worst law firm in the country or whatever. And now we're in the top 10 law firms nationally when it comes to the Sunday Times best stuff. Our Glassdoor score went from 1.9 to about 4.3, 4.2, something like that. So our engagement stats have gone up. We're 61st in the top large companies in the UK to work for in the Sunday Times. And this has all happened in the space of about 2.5, 3 years. So it's not just because of me, but the leader sets the tone.
Yeah.
And so you need to role model and show the kind of culture and the kind of business you want to be. And we've obviously done a lot of work on our strategy and our vision and our values and various other things as well. And we have some amazing people in the business. So it's not just about me, but I probably was the catalyst that sets some of it off. But that's the whole point about leadership. You can't do it all yourself. You need to set the snowball rolling, and then hopefully it gains momentum and it becomes something far bigger than you could possibly do by yourself.
And was there resistance to this culture change?
Yeah, yeah. So some people.
So how do you deal with that?
So we basically said that this is who we are. This is what we're all about. It won't work for everybody.
That's right.
If it doesn't work for you, we'll come to a way and we'll find a way of helping you. We talked about getting off the bus, and some of our senior people decided that they were going to retire a bit early because we've got some major changes, and they were at a point in their career where they weren't up for it, but they were saying, good luck to you, we think what you're doing is brilliant, but it's not for me at this point in my life. There were other people who didn't like that culture, not many, a handful of them, and happily, luckily, they've gone to other law firms who have a more traditional culture, and they're happy and thriving. So, and we've had loads of people join. I mean, that's the big thing. It's felt like we were sending out a beacon into the sector to say, this is what we stand for, this is what we're all about, and then it just makes recruitment. It's a totally different ball game with that, because people, you're already talking to people that share at least a chunk of the same vision and values. And of course, for diversity of thinking, you don't want clones. We don't all want to be the same. But if you're united with something, if there's something in the middle of the Venn diagram, typically it will strengthen the business and the momentum just grows. And we had our first face-to-face membership conference with about 150 people there last November, the first one since the lockdown, and the culture change was palpable. It had been 2 years prior to that since I'd been able to stand face-to-face in front of the membership, the partners, and I was actually quite emotional because it just felt different. And sometimes it feels to me like we're leading a movement, not a business. I mean, clearly we are a business and that's massively important, but there's a really strong sense of shared purpose, and you can't, not only can you not beat that, but you can't fake that. And that makes a big difference.
In the NHS, one of the problems in the leadership is that the people who do administrators are seen to be not understanding what the consultants do.
Yeah.
And that's what, they always seem to have that conflict. So in terms of culture change, you're now asking a bunch of solicitors, and you're not a lawyer.
No.
To change.
Heaven forbid. We're all human beings, though.
To change. So how did you, if you get my drift, how did you get them to change with you? Because they're just going to say, you don't understand what it's like to be a lawyer.
I am so lucky that I've never had them say that to me. They'll probably say it behind my back or something.
Okay.
But we do it through several different ways. I mean, so if you take the board, which we've restructured since I've been here, we have a mixture of, and I hate the phrase non-lawyers, but I will use it for shorthand. So we have people with different skills around the table, and they're there because they can do the job. They're there because they're good at what they do. They bring something to the party. They work as a team. Amazing bunch of people. If I look at it statistically, by accident, it's about half lawyer and half non-lawyer. But the lawyers that are on that board don't do any legal work anymore. They're on that board because they're fantastic leaders and brilliant managers, and they've learnt skills beyond that. I think we have to stop perpetuating the dialogue that says that the degree that you decided to do when you were 18 or 19 or 20 or whatever puts you into a box and you can't come out of it. It's never too late to change. It's never too late for people to develop different skills. So there is definitely, I agree with you, a perception of culture in the legal sector that was definitely true and is still true in some law firms, but I don't think we really have that culture. And a huge amount of our lawyers are innovative, driving change, and I don't see them as lawyers and non-lawyers. We're just people with strengths that work together around something and bring what we can to the party, really. So we're very lucky here that we don't have that divide in the same way that I think we have in a lot of other law firms.
People are telling me that they're struggling to recruit, particularly in the legal sector.
Yeah.
You've managed to go from 800 to 1,300, and you're still growing. And do you think, in part, it's to do with the openness of your culture and what you do on social media, that actually one of the benefits of it is you're so available that it becomes easier to recruit, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think when you are clear what you stand for, and I think we're filling a bit of a gap of much needed change or perception of change in the sector that won't be for everybody. Like I say, there are some people who don't want the sector to change or want it to change in a different way. And again, that's absolutely fine. But we're really clear what we stand for. So a lot of the people that are coming to us are because they see that we're different, that differentiator. We have to look at particularly in professional services, you're as much marketing to the people in the firm as you are to the clients. We need to do it the same way. So you segment the employee base, you make sure that you've got different solutions in place in the same way you would with a client solution. So I think it's worked in a very, very similar way by clarifying purpose, vision, values, who we are, what we're all about, offering something a little bit different. It means that we're a little bit ahead on the recruitment game, but it's tough for everybody on recruitment. Some of the numbers you've talked about there have come through our M&A strategy. So we're growing organically, and last year's growth percentage was 16% up organically, but add to that the businesses that are coming into the group as well. So it's a combination of two things. But if I carry on that theme, so we've had several smaller businesses now come into the group, and they can either come in, back to my branding stuff here, they can either come in under an existing brand like Shakespeare Martineau, Lyme, Marin's Core Claim, Reddens were our main brands. We've created a couple of other brands, and now we're bringing in wholesale different law firm brands to operate in different parts of the country. So Mayo and Baxter joined us because they saw something on social media. So they joined us. They actually came on board 1st of May this year, which is, a couple of hundred people, decent-sized law firm that operate in the southeast. So it works for businesses as well as working for individuals.
Interesting that it was social media that led you there.
It was.
And so we're talking about recruitment, we're talking about talent, we're talking about the pandemic. To what extent have you had to accept, or you're open to, hybrid working? Are you now saying that's the way we're now working? Because now you don't need to go to every office, and now you can be open and available. Is that the way forward now for the professions? Is hybrid working is now the way forward?
Yeah, 100%. I was there anyway, so I introduced it previously in about 2013. But for me, you've got to be really careful about what hybrid working means, because hybrid working to me might mean something different to you, might mean something different to, some of the people around us at the moment. So what we have is what we call empowered working, which is you choose. So we talked about recruitment and war for talent, which is a big thing at the moment, not just for the sector but across the UK actually, and giving people choice is as important as rewarding properly. You've got to do both, but choice is at the heart of this, and personalisation. It's also a way to actually improve inclusion, diversity, etc., etc. So thankfully, the pandemic gave the opportunity to prove to anyone who's still sceptical about it that productivity can go up when people are allowed to choose where they work. And of course, in the height of the pandemic, they couldn't choose where they work. They had to work at home. So for some people, they can't work at home. They hate it. They're not good at it. They want to be in an office. For other people, they are really productive at home but love coming into an office to collaborate. So what we've done is to say, okay, we're going to think about outputs, not inputs. So we're going to, are you hitting your objectives? And for some people, that's around delivering chargeable hours, looking after clients. For other people, it's working in finance, IT, whatever it may be. But are you hitting your objectives? Do you feel like you're part of a team? And that's really important, because we still need teams to function together, collaborate and feel part of something. And thirdly, are your clients and other people able to get hold of you, know where you are? And then fourthly, is it working for you? Can you make your life and your work come together in a way that is really positive for you? If you can do all of those four things, we genuinely do not care where you work, when you work, how many hours you work, or what time of day you're doing it. You could decide to take Wednesday off and work on Saturday, as long as people know that, and it's not going to mean that you let a client down with something. So we've called it empowered working. And it was really interesting, because it's a bit like chucking somebody in a swimming pool when they don't know how to swim, because people are used to rules, aren't they? Like, you have to be at work for 9 and you will take an hour. So for some people, they wanted that structure to start with. So we realised we had to put the armbands back on a little bit, but we did it at team level to say, well, okay, agree as a team then what structure you want to bring in. So some teams have said we're going to be in 2 days a week and we're going to collaborate in this particular office on that particular day. Other teams are letting individuals work it out. So we're basically empowering them, but it was really interesting how scary it was for some people to have all the rules taken away. So I think that would be my learning, is if you take some of the rules away too quickly, it's a bit strange out there. So you let the armbands down gradually, don't you? You don't chuck people in the deep end. But essentially what we're aiming for here is personalisation and flexibility and choice, which I think solves an awful lot of other issues as well. So we're keeping all of our offices, we're converting them, like this one that you're sitting in here, to more collaboration hubs, and making them places that people want to come, and can see the real benefit of coming, but equally you can get the best out of working at a client's space, or in a coffee shop, or on the train, or in the garden shed.
we've talked about leadership. We've talked about social media.
Yes.
We've talked about your views on politics. We're sitting in July 2022, and I know some people might come back in time later and come to this, but I couldn't miss the opportunity, even if by the time they listen to it, the leadership debate around the Tories and the might be over. But so it'd be just interesting to get your views on the link between politics and the economy. As a top legal firm, with a lot of people, working for you, the economy matters because it affects everything. Cost of living, it affects the way your people work, what it's costing them, and of course, how the clients react. So, firstly, leadership, and then we'll go to the economy.
Yeah.
Any views as a leader as to what you've seen put in front of you?
Gosh, so what's been really interesting, I've been on what I call holiday, which means an actual holiday where you go somewhere and you don't work, as opposed to a day that you take off, pretend you're not working and call it holiday. So I've been on holiday. So I've been abroad watching all of this go on. So Boris Johnson resigned the day after I got on holiday, and I've been watching this from afar. I have to say, I'm embarrassed about what I'm seeing at the moment. And I'm politically reasonably agnostic, pretty much in the centre as a personal view. So this is it is not an anti-Tory thing. There are some aspects of traditional Tory economic policy that I'm completely in agreement with. Devolution, smaller state, etc. So I'm not making this as a political statement, but I watch that and I've had my head in my hands, honestly. It shows me why politics is totally and utterly broken. It's there to serve the politicians, not to serve the country. The short-termism of it to get political gain is seriously damaging. We need long-term strategic economic policy that transcends governments, that doesn't change every time the political system changes or the leader changes. It's not democracy for 600 people or whatever the number is to be able to vote in the next Prime Minister. And it's definitely, from a leadership point of view, appalling for somebody to have been in cabinet 2 or 3 weeks ago and now be trashing the thing they've been responsible for the 3 years prior to that. I mean, it's an embarrassment.
I saw this. It'd be interesting what you think. I saw this survey. It was on the BBC. So they went to the Middle East and asked the population, "What are your views on democracy?"
Yeah.
They trashed it.
Yeah.
And they trashed democracy because they felt, even if you end up with a dictatorship, that dictatorship thinks long term.
Yes.
That dictatorship will ride over any objections and will think long term.
Yeah.
And China's been cited as an example. If you look at the investments China have now made around the world, I mean, they are now so economically strong. Sri Lanka is depending on them before the IMF will give them money. Sri Lanka's depending on China. So I suppose, is one of the consequences of democracy, that if we're going to have a democracy, then we have to accept that part of it is that politicians will run with short-term policies because that's what will ensure that they stay in power for longer. So is this something, despite the attractiveness of long-term structural policies, is this what democracy gives you, and do we have to simply live with it?
So I'm reflecting on this quite a lot at the moment because I don't like to go out there and criticise something if I can't at least offer a solution. Anybody can stand on the sidelines and say, that's not right, is it? So a couple of things I would say, and I must admit I haven't looked into this enough and I'm still looking into it. But Scandinavia seems to get away with some of this. And they do it by collaborative hung parliaments where multiple parties form a government. Essentially, there are very few majority. So that's really interesting. And I think a new form of more collaborative politics, potentially where you don't change everybody all at the same time, would be a really innovative and interesting model. So it's almost like a bit like a board. You don't have all your Neds step down at the same time. You've got people on non-coterminous terms. That would be a fascinating way. I mean, we do it a bit with by-elections, but they're minuscule. So I wonder if there's an entirely different way of doing democracy that does give an element of democracy, but an element of consistency. And the biggie is collaboration or co-opetition.
So there are two examples of one where it's worked well, Germany.
Yes.
They always have coalitions.
Yes, true, actually. And the devolution of Germany, which I believe in as well.
Now, when it doesn't appear to work well, and I think they're on the verge of another collapse, is Italy. They seem to be going through coalitions. And they seem
but
to
things
collapse.
go in cycles, don't they? And I think it's to do with the type of coalition. Sometimes you get a forced coalition,
Yep.
or sometimes it's accepted as a beneficial system. And I think it's the difference. So I think we'd have to have a massive mindset shift. The other thing that bothers me is I think there are some amazing leaders out there and people in business who would be fantastic in government, but they won't go near it because the political system is so toxic. And I think a smaller government state with more devolution and a bigger role for business, which has the more long-term perspective, but with the social aspects and the overall governance of government. I don't know. I'm not there with this yet, but I know there's got to be a different way.
Talking about the role of business in government, I was with a very, very successful retailer, and he wanted, was thinking about his next step.
Yes.
And he did think about politics.
Yeah.
And then he left me with one comment. He said, this guy's hugely successful. He said, my problem is, he said, they will never vote in a billionaire. Mm-hmm. So you know something, if you think of what Rishi Sunak is going through,
say, yeah.
You see what he's going through.
I know.
So we might have, if you take America, they applaud their business people, they applaud their entrepreneurs.
Thing,
they're quite happy, whether you disagree or not, of have Trump as their president. I think Bush was a successful businessman. So it seems to be a totally different way of thinking, and I think until culturally we accept that business has a really important role and that a lot of talent, I meet this talent all the time.
Yeah.
But they are put off by the media stance on wealth.
Yeah.
And
well, and also the appalling scrutiny. Every aspect of your life gets put under. I mean, I was talking to some friends, fellow chief execs recently, a couple of whom I think would be phenomenal in politics, but they don't want to go there. And again, another, I shan't say who this is, but somebody I know who was seen as a political rising star came out of politics a few years ago because of the scrutiny his family were being put under. So what kind of personality? It's leading us down a route that there's a very specific kind of personality that's willing to throw themselves into this lion's den, and it's not necessarily the right people who are the people who should be leading the country for the better good of the country and the long-term policies and things that we need to deliver the best results for everybody. It's just the whole thing is working against itself at the moment.
I was speaking to somebody in Germany, and they said they try not to buy too extravagant a car, because the likelihood is if they did, they'd be scratched. So this seems to be a European problem, I think, again,
But it's a protest vote, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting. In America, you're right, it was observed differently because Trump got in, but he was a billionaire, but he didn't get in because he was seen as a successful businessman. He got in because he was the anti-establishment vote, and he was offering hope to people who had lost faith that the politicians were out of touch, that there was some kind of a bubble in the same way we talk about the Westminster bubble, and he offered hope and change. So I don't think necessarily his wealth worked against him or for him. It was the anti-establishment.
But again, Bloomberg, he almost threw himself in, and he was a multi-billionaire.
Yeah.
It just seems to be they seem to accept billionaires
but you know, again, we just need to get over this. How are we judging people? Let's talk about positive policy-based politics. Now, you've got to have a bit of personality thrown in there because people want to listen to people they can engage with. They want to listen to people who've got something to say. But the whole thing's just become personality-based, short-term personality-based, and all about politics serving politics. And we've got to shift the dialogue to a more positive one.
Well, moving on, because we could be here all day around leadership.
When we rule the world, Ninder, we'll sort this out.
We can't change the world in terms of society and the way the political systems work, but business, in terms of the economy, where did you have some idea of where do you and again, just to remind people, we're sitting in July.
Yes.
Mid-July, so it'll be interesting what we think now. It'll be interesting to look back to what our thoughts were. So we've talked about leadership, the problem around leadership politically, but what about the bit we can do towards the economy? So where do you see the economy going with inflation, cost of living, and I've heard, by the way, this morning oil prices are dropping.
And the petrol prices have just come down a bit, haven't they? So it will shift a bit.
Yeah, are we seeing the end of that?
Sadly not. No, I don't think we are. So I was asked to do a keynote a few weeks ago, and it did make me laugh because somebody said, "Can you tell us what changes are going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years?" I can't tell you what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 weeks, but what I can do, what I did was I looked back over time because you've heard me say this at some of our CBI meetings, I'm really concerned that we were approaching a supply-side economic crisis with demand-side measures. I mean, the Bank of England have literally, it's like if you ever saw Blackadder 2, the only thing the doctor could prescribe was a course of leeches. It seems to be the same thing with the Bank of England. It's like, oh, what can we do? Let's put interest rates up. That could potentially drive us into a recession, but it's the only easy tool. I know we've got quantitative easing and all the rest of it, but it's the only effective tool that they've been used to using when inflation is being driven by demand. We have an unprecedented supply side situation. But then I thought, do you know what? Business comes in cycles. This can't be totally unprecedented. So I look back. End of the First World War, end of the Second World War, and some of what was going on in the 70s with the oil crisis and the Cold War. There are some really big lessons there. If that follows through, and I was writing this before the strikes had started, what I said was we're going to see strikes, we're going to see rationing. We'll probably see rationing of limited resources in some way, particularly energy, given where that's going at the moment. We are going to see huge inflation for a while until we can fix the supply side problems. If we over or understimulate the market, and particularly business, which I'll come back to, we'll also see a pretty deep recession, which might end up deeper. We may be into, depression, hopefully not slump. But we are killing growth and investment. And at the heart of all of this at the moment is business confidence, growth and investment. And we mustn't switch that off. Otherwise, genuinely, we're going to start the downward spiral. It'll be very difficult to come out of it. So I think we are going to have to change some of our current economic monetary policy, fiscal policy. For example, the 2% inflation thing, it's not valid anymore. We need to agree a level that's more valid, probably 5%. Nobody wants to be at 5%, but if the measure's wrong, let's be brave enough to change it for a period. So there's things like that. But coming back to business confidence, so I wrote an article about 18 months ago. Again, I thought the Chancellor was just about to bring the budget out. I thought, I'm going to sit here and criticise the budget, so I need to put my money where my mouth is and write down what I would do, because it's all right criticising. So I wrote an article called The Economics of And I looked at, again, a Venn diagram. I think you can solve the world with a Venn diagram, of where can we find things that help us with the climate crisis, which it is as much of a crisis as anything else we're seeing at the moment.
Except none of the contenders for the Tory party
are
have
even
spoken
talking about it. And Kemi even said, I believe, that she'd take us out of the agreement.
She would.
This is short-term politics. This is precisely, that's somebody else's problem in the future. But if we look at, so let's find the win-win. So let's accept and acknowledge we need to do something about that. Let's accept and acknowledge we're going to have to spend more money for a while, and let's accept that business has a role to play in this. So what's in the middle? Finding initiatives that help bring more talent in, that help us spend money and fix climate challenges at the same time and drive growth in our exports, etc. Let's own some of those things in the middle. And whatever those things are, and we could get into this in quite a lot of detail, I think find the sweet spot and focus on it, because there's a lot of people saying we can't afford to do all of these things at the moment. Well, let's find things that kill more than one bird with one stone, join up effort, have smoother longer term policy and cut the rest of the noise out. Ultimately, we're going to have to put differences aside and get in it together and get on with it. And that's why I get so frustrated by all the infighting at the moment. It's not taking us anywhere. We've just put ourselves into another few months of absolute stasis. When we need to be getting on with it.
Yeah, will be interesting. It's, with the economy, I agree with you. It's the problem is the supply. We had the problem with Ukraine, we've had the problem with the Suez Canal.
Well, and to be fair, whatever your views are on Brexit, that has caused supply chain problems for talent and for materials. We've chucked a load of bureaucracy in to not help entrepreneurial and smaller businesses, which isn't helping. I mean, we've heard it at the CBI, some of our colleagues talking about the fact that their input costs have gone through the roof. Business inflation is running at 20% at the moment. I know we talk about the consumer price index, but businesses are seeing 20% hikes. So this isn't sustainable. We have to support business. Changing the incentives around helping businesses invest is at the heart of this, and we need to do that quickly.
And do you think, before we close off, do you think you doing what you do on social media, and if everybody did that, then people would notice what business is thinking, and may then start to say, well, actually, perhaps, and is it because we don't have, I know we've got the CBI, the Chambers of Commerce and all these things, but my impression of the last 4 or 5 years is that we've been frozen out by government. I always get the impression. And it could be that maybe, yes, it's great, CBI and Chambers all do a great job, but actually maybe we as leaders should adopt the way you do, which is social media, make your views known, and if enough people say it,
it's like setting off a wave. I
then
think of it sometimes as throwing stones, all creating their own little ripples, but eventually the whole pond starts to come together. I think collaboration is key, not just across business, government and public sector, but I think higher ed has a big role to play in this as well. They have a very strong position and access to a huge amount of talent, lots of them still doing very well with the ability to invest, drive innovation, research, etc. So for me, we should be collaborating and working on this together. The heart of this is coming together to fix these problems. I do think we've been frozen out. I think shouting out on social media is part of it, but ultimately we need to rethink the infrastructure behind that, where we actually pull people together to work on actual things we do something about, not just focus groups where they listen to us, the platitudes are there, and then nothing changes. But we need a total rethink about how we pull our country and help pull the world out of genuinely a huge crisis. But I do think we've got everything we need to do it if we just did it differently.
3 very quick last questions.
Yeah.
Ready? So the first one is, what do you look for when you recruit? Give me 3 things you look for when you recruit.
Passion.
Okay.
Somebody who is willing to be themselves. I mean, genuinely bring their own strengths, bring their authenticity. So not somebody who's willing to just be what they think you want them to be. And somebody who wants to learn, actually, who doesn't think that they're the finished article, whatever age or whatever experience they are.
And would you check their social media profile?
No.
Okay.
I haven't done, actually.
Okay.
I mean, I might occasionally look, but I don't bring that into it because, again, back to not wanting to control them, etc. But people do. I have at least on a normal week several thousand people checking my social media profile.
So they are checking.
They are. But you've got to have the confidence to be yourself and not get knocked off track because people are looking at what you say.
Interesting. Those 3 tips have nothing to do with the CV. Interesting, isn't it? Everybody focuses on the CV.
Yes.
But you've said 3 things not available on a CV, which you need one-to-one. And a lot of people fail at the CV. So anyway, that's enough. 3 tips then for leadership, particularly as you went through change and the big change through pandemic. What 3 tips would you give to leaders?
Do you know, I wrote something that's pinned to the top of my Twitter account, which were 3 words that popped into my head on March the 20th, 2020, when we went into lockdown, which were be brave, be honest, be kind. And I'm struggling to come up with a better one than that. Be brave, be kind, honest.
And be honest.
Yeah.
Finally, what does success look like for you?
Gosh, personally, business-wide, I don't know. On a personal level, that I've made a difference, done my best, and enabled other people to do their best. And I'm being a bit of a role model that's driven more opportunity. I'm a girl from a council estate in Lincoln, my mum was a barmaid, I've never met my dad. I want more people to have that kind of chance. And I think you've got to be what you can't see. I mean, the phrase gets used a lot. So that I've helped other people do that. That's a massive thing. But I also want to prove that business can be purposeful and commercially successful at the same time. And if I can add a little bit to that debate and demonstrate a bit that can be done, I'll feel pretty pleased.
So today, in about 45 minutes, we've covered quite a bit. We've talked about, and I think we featured on how leaders can set the tone.
Yeah.
How leaders in this new world need to be open. You're completely convinced that social media should be used by leaders and not hide and shun away from it. You've talked about how it would make an impact on recruitment. You've talked about, because of hybrid, you let people, I love the word, you empower them to decide how they want to work.
Yeah.
So, and again, I like the word you said, you give them choice as well as reward.
Yes.
It's not been the traditional way. It's always been linked around reward, and it's always been linked about, not flexible, inflexibility, presenteeism. You've talked about how it can raise productivity. You've talked about, I thought this is quite a major one, trust your people.
Definitely.
Show them the way you're doing it, but trust them, and don't act like parents, which I thought was really good. Clearly the proof's in the pudding, because you're soaring up the charts in terms of the places to work. And I think it's been interesting hearing how a non-lawyer can bring change into a legal profession. That's been interesting. It's clearly working because you're growing. And you talked about one of the big learning lessons was not moving too fast for your people, because some people like to take longer. So that's been interesting. We've spoken about leadership and changing the entire political world.
Oh, yes.
Yes. We've talked about economic challenges going forward and where we think the business is going. We talked about what does success look like. And I suppose the question I'm going to ask is, what about politics?
What, me?
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things that we all sit here thinking we could do a better job, but in that system, it's like a gladiator going into the arena. I want to change the arena. So it would be wrong of me to go into there, because you'd get swallowed up and thrown back out again. Whereas I think we need to blur those boundaries and change things. And I think as business leaders, we can play on that pitch and help drive more change than probably by getting sucked into the system.
I think my final observation, just picking that up, is that as business leaders, we really do need to communicate with the outside world as to what we really think.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think if enough of us do it, actually business can make a change for the better.
I agree, Ninder, and you do it brilliantly as well. And I think
the
more of us, the better.
Well, that's been fantastic. I don't know where 50 minutes have gone. It's almost 55. But I think we've covered a range of subjects. And I'll tell you what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to your next issue or your next article in the Business Influencer magazine. Yes, we've already decided on the title.
We have.
And I think that'll be great. So listen, thank you very much for taking that
Pleasure.
time. It still looks sunny. So I suspect it's still almost 40 degrees.
It probably is.
So I'm looking forward to coming from this air-conditioned office into my air-conditioned car and make my way back to Birmingham. Thank you very much, Sherry. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure, as always.
Thank you. Cheers.